What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr, and today, as it is officially the 1st of March, I thought I'd start the month off by taking you through my personal top 5 budget decks that you can build without breaking the bank and still compete at the top level for this format. Now, as we move into this format, it is of course officially a tier 0 fire format, which does mean unless you want to be dropping around about £700 for the top deck and learning it inside out just for Konami to give it a slap at the end of the month and possibly hitting a few cards in it to crush its consistency, you might want to be looking elsewhere in order to compete. So the 5 decks that I'm going to bring you today are all decks that have competitive advantages against the top meta decks, but it will come down to you as the pilot. So if you are interested in any of the decks that I show you, make sure you learn them inside and out, practice the matchups, and you will be able to take a few games off of the top meta decks and take it as far as you possibly can. Now this list is going to be in no very specific order, but we're going to talk about the deck's consistency, what it can do, and then the roundabout prices that each of them kind of hold. So we're going to be diving headfirst into this. Before I do that, I am going to give some honourable mention to some decks that do not make this top cut, and that's personally just decks that I have seen in my local environment do pretty well, and they do have some advantages, but overall when you're looking at the main meta decks of being Voiceless Voice, Snake Eyes, and of course other anti-meta decks that could cost a bit of money in the form of stuff like Cash Tiras, you might want to be looking elsewhere. So those honourable mentions are of course Magic Spectres. I've had quite a lot of fun with that deck recently, and of course Red Dragon Archfiend. They're just 2 decks that have surprised a lot of people that have been creeping into the top cuts and getting first and seconds at the local environments, especially with Voiceless Voice and of course Fire King Snake Eyes running around. Moving into the top 5, so we're going to start off with one of my personal favourite decks. I really do enjoy this deck, and it kind of comes down to personal preference on this one. It may hit into your top 5, it may be an honourable mention, it really is up to you, but that is of course Exosisters. Now the reason that I'm rating Exosisters this highly is for the pure fact that it can play D-Shifter, so it gets the ability to play one of the most powerful anti-meta hand traps of the format. It is a very low resource combo deck in the form that all it really needs is 1 or 2 Exosisters to go off, and it's able to build up a board that doesn't rely on destroying your opponent's cards, but more so banishing them, being able to get around certain forms of protection that they might be able to build in the Snake Eyes variant. On top of that as well, it has a lot of space in the main deck, meaning that it can utilise what is currently looking like the average hand trap ratio lineup of anywhere between 12 to 15 hand traps. Now on the flip side of a deck like this, you do need to be careful, because if your opponent is playing 15 odd hand traps, you need to make sure that you can protect against them where at all able. And those technical hand traps you're going to be looking against is going to be stuff like Ash Blossoms. You need to be careful against Draw and Lock Birds, Infinite Impermanences. The one thing you don't really need to worry about in Exosisters is of course going to be D-Shifter. Moving on down the list, the next one that I want to be talking about is a brand new deck. Well, not a brand new deck, but a deck that got a massive boost of consistency thanks to Phantom Nightmare, and that is of course Raidraptors. Now I think Raidraptors are incredibly powerful right now. Very few decks can actually out the Ultimate Falcon and the Rising Rebellion Falcon that the deck can now produce very, very easily. The deck also has a huge amount of consistency, being able to play through multiple levels of hand traps dependent on what is being dropped on them, and it does have loads of free extenders that can provide you with targeted protection, as well as being able to provide you with multiple rank 4s on the end of the board to build up into your big Arsenal Falcon, which ultimately once it hits the board is very, very difficult for your opponent to get rid of, even when they are playing a card like Super Poly in the form of Voiceless Voice or another deck that is going to appear on this list. It can be very, very damaging. Raidraptors on top of that are relatively budget. There's probably about 1 or 2 cards, and I get asked this quite a few, where the cost kind of comes into it, and it's mainly about Strangolanius, because that currently sits at like £15 to £18 here in the UK per copy. So straight away you're spending a roughly £45 to £60 on 3 cards of the deck, and the rest of the deck you can get incredibly cheaply thanks to the reprints of Tribute Lanius and of course 4 Strix in the most recent OTS 24. So the deck can be built relatively budget. If you were able to pick up your Strangolanises a little bit earlier on, you wouldn't be paying the extortionate prices that are going around right now. But it is a little bit of hype for the deck, but it's still incredibly powerful, and it can be utilised either as a pure Raidraptor option, or of course you can mix in Phantom Knights to provide you with even more forms of interruption and disruption for your opponent's board, maybe even a Kali Yuga turn skip. Moving on to the next one on this list. Now, I'm going to be a little bit biased on this list and the way it kind of comes up, but it kind of comes down to, like I said, it's my personal top 5. Everyone else will have their own. But number 3, we are sitting with another brand new deck, thanks to Phantom Nightmare, or again, a deck that has had a massive consistency boost and is only going to get better when we get the next set of Legacy Destruction, and that is, of course, Ubel. Now, Ubel has the most amazing factor that it's probably got one of the strongest super poly targets in the entire game. The issue is it just needs to get a Ubel monster onto the board. It can utilise cards outright like Super Poly, but it can also be utilised with other engines such as the Unchained to provide them with quicker, easier access to SP Little Knight if you want to splash the budget, or of course go into something like a Nightmare Unicorn if you want to try and hold back that £80 to £90 investment for an SP Little Knight. On top of that as well, Ubel is incredibly consistent. We did recently get a reprint of the original Ubel thanks to the Battles of Legend collection, which did kind of take it from being a £35 super, a £15 rare, to approximately £10 to £15 as an ultra rare, so it's a little bit easier to get hold of, as well as the Terra Incarnate. The deck is very, very powerful. It can utilise OTKs, it can break opponents' boards, and it has a good balance of going first and second. I believe you'll start seeing more of these come around, and at current, when you picked up the when you picked up the deck on pre-order from Phantom Nightmare, you're probably paying around about £50 maximum. It's now currently sitting around £70 and climbing because the Loving Defender, which of course is the Ubel fusion monster, is currently costing anywhere from £15 to £20 a copy. So make sure if you are interested in this deck, you pick them up quickly. It does get 2 brand new support cards in Legacy of Destruction, and that will definitely help the deck out, giving it more consistency in order to play through quite a nice range of hand traps. On top of that, it has the ability to give your opponent a monster, immediately shutting off something like an Infinite Impermanence, as well as then being able to build up his own board to try and dodge certain hand traps. It also has the benefit of other decks on this list to be able to play Dimension Shifter, which can be massively damaging when we are looking at a format where they need their graveyard, or they're going to need to play a stun to turn for the next game. Moving on to number 2 on this list. Now, I feel that number 2 could swap with number 1. I feel that you could rearrange some of this list depending on where you want to. And like I said, they're in no particular order. I've just kind of put them in what I feel is the cheapest, easiest, and most effective when you're trying to combine all 3 of those criteria. So next one, of course, is Branded. Now, unfortunately, Branded has come a little bit narrow in its sense, and its most competitive value right now is being able to give your opponent the Gimmick Puppet Lock, because it will skip their entire turn, you then come back to your turn and push for the OTK. Now, it does have other elements in the form of stuff like Mirror Jade and consistency, being able to play with stuff like Fusion Deployment if you go down that route, Fusion Duplication, Branded Fusion, Cartesia. We have seen it in the top 4 of UDS. We've also been able to see it featured at the most recent YCS 3v3 in Vegas, which is still incredibly powerful. The deck has had no major hits apart from that one trap card, which isn't a massive loss, but it still is able to produce the Gimmick Puppet Lock with the greatest of ease. It can utilise the Bestials if it wants to, and if it really, really wanted to, it could even play D-Shifter, which again is one of them ones where you don't have to be playing it, but if you know that you can drop a Shifter and it will end your opponent's entire turn, you're going to do it, considering when you're going to be taking out the Gimmick Puppet Lock when you know you're going second in order to break a board rather than trying to stun a board that is already built. Moving into the final one. Now, of course, this one is Floowandereeze. Now, Floowandereeze is, of course, a very, very baseline deck because it doesn't require the extra deck at all, and it can be quite consistent when you are looking at stuff like Pot of Extravagance, Pot of Duality, and then obviously it's constant access to its level 1 monsters that allows you to utilise stuff like D-Shifter. Now, the biggest issue facing this deck right now is, of course, a card like Droll and Lockbird, and the only way that it can deal with Droll and Lockbird is if it does D-Shifter prior to that happening. Floowandereeze has the ability to control the board, it has the ability to bounce the board. The one thing it is missing currently is the access to the Winged Barrier statue because it is on the ban list. The deck is still incredibly powerful, relatively cheap and easy to pick up, and it's relatively cheap and easy to kind of master and understand, as it does kind of minimise the different mechanics that you are going to need in a deck. When you look at Branded, you've got to be considering the fusion aspect on that, and you've got to be able to figure out when you're going to be utilising these fusion cards in order to give your opponent a gimmick lock. Whereas with the Floowandereeze, you just need to make sure you get your chains right in order to protect your building up from the Ash Blossom hand trap in order to get to the rest of your birds. Setting up an M-Pen, which can be a one-sided technical skill drain, alongside a Ryzen, which can be a nice little bounce and recycle to the board. Not to mention you can even recycle your own D-Shifter to completely flood out your opponent's graveyard. On top of that, you can then also add the Avian, which provides you with an Omni Negate to protect your board from stuff like evenly matches and barriers that you do need to be quite careful of. So that's it for my 5 budget competitive decks for this upcoming format. Like I said, a lot of people will have other decks that they might want to consider for this list. I didn't want to make the deck be all about being able to play D-Shifter, because then that's just one card that you're hoping to draw in a deck of 40. There's a lot of other decks I would like to put on this list, but when you're kind of combining different types of interactions, different type of hand traps, and of course the main meta decks being Voiceless Voice in its form of its own little mini towers and a non-negate, alongside Fire Kings with huge consistencies, incredibly powerful boards, and just pure outright graveyard control, you do need to be a little bit careful. But like I said, with all 5 decks on this list, you can very easily build them for around about £100 or less, which works out about $120 or even $100 in the right kind of scenarios. And then when you're comparing it to Snake Eyes and Voiceless Voice, here in the UK, you're looking at about £220 to £250 for Voiceless Voice, works out around about $300. And then for a full-on Snake Eyes Fire King build, you could be looking at anywhere from £500 all the way up to £600, even $600 to $700. So it's a massive jump in price comparison, and when you're looking to just play the format, get through to Euros, or even get through to the next ban list without losing massive interest, there's loads of fun decks out there. And like I said at the start of the video, me personally, I found Magic Spectres to be incredibly fun, and at the end of the day, it all comes down to, are you enjoying the game and what type of decks you can look at without having to break the bank. You don't want to go, cool, I need to splash huge amounts of cash on a deck just to even survive it in this format and then get hit with a ban list. Go and find a deck that is just incredibly fun and can really catch a lot of people off guard. You will guarantee to get loads of different wins at locals if you master them and if you understand their interactions, as well as then being able to take it to more confident levels in forms of YCSs, heck, even regionals, and then moving on to, of course, the most recently announced nationals and, of course, Euros for us here in the UK, while also having American events over your side as well. Anyway, I hope this video has been informative. I hope it's given you a nice little breakdown of my personal decks that I feel that are relatively budget, that's not even a word, budget and competitive for this upcoming format, and definitely gives you something to look onto and something to be considering to build. Like I said, I do have loads of other deck profiles that I'll be bringing for the channel as well. So if you do have any specific requests or questions, by all means, please put them in the comments down below. I will be more than happy to answer them for you. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, as absolutely always, stay safe. And of course, happy dueling.